daf of the parak. So we're going to start veering off a little bit from the subject matter. Okay, so let's see what we have. So yesterday we learned that there's a rule called stam nedarim lahachmer. That is, if there's something that could be interpreted as a hatfasa to a davar another, but it can equally be interpreted as a hatfasa to a davar ha'asur. And one example the Gemara gave is kibasar meliach. So that could be referring to a carbon, or it could be referring to a avodah. If there's no explanation given, we say stam nedarim lahachmer. The intent was to be matfis b'davar another. If one specified, then of course we say that however he specified is what his meaning was. So if he specified kavod zara, that hatpasa b'davar ha'asur, and there and the nether would not be valid. That's what we finished off with the Mishnah. So frek the Gemara v'hatanan sofek neziris lahakel. Our Mishnah says stam nedarim lahachmir. Yet the Mishnah in Tahiris says sofek neziris lahakel, which is a direct contradiction to our Mishnah. Amar Abzeira zok Abzeira loy kasha. In fact, there's a machlokes tanoim, and the Mishnah in Tahiris argues on our Mishnah. Who are the tanoim? Ha Rabbi Eliezer, ha Rabbanon. Rabbi Eliezer holds sofek neziris lahakel, and our Mishnah is going according to the Rabbanon, who holds sofek nedarim lachumah. Titania, where did we find that they argue? They're arguing in this following case: Hamakish chayasai or ubehemtoi. So either he said, "I want to be makish my chayas," or he said, "I want to be makish my behemoths." The halach is hikdish es hakoi or es hakfi. He is makish to kfi. In other words, even though it's a suffix, if he means to include a kfi, because a kfi might be a behemoth or it might be a chaya. Nevertheless, we say that his intention was also to include things that aren't a vadei chaya or that aren't a vadei behemoth, but he's even including things that are also a suffix behemoth. Rabbi Eliezer Omer lo hikdish es hakfi. He did not have in mind to answer something that was a suffix. Zaktumar man de Omer mamoinoi ma'ayol osleika. According to the Rabbanan, who holds that when he's referring to his mammon, such as being makdish his animal, he doesn't mean to include even something that's only in the suffix category. Gufay nami ma'ayol. He will also hold that when you're making an isser upon yourself, like you say, koinim alai kavasam aliyach, you also mean to include sveikas. So when you are referring to basam aliyach, which is a suffix, you also have in mind to include that in the isser. So it's not a direct correlation. It's not exactly the same thing, but the Gemara is saying, Rabbi Zera is saying that they should be the same lahalacha. If someone has in mind, in his words, behema, ta'asr, even something that's a suffix behema, then that would also translate into someone who is picking hatfasa of a davar maliach would have in mind the davar ha'asr. In other words, when he wades into a gray area, he wants to include that in his isser. And Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that he doesn't mean to include even a suffix behema or even a suffix chaya, he likes things that are very clear cut. Gufe kosher. Surely, if he doesn't even want to include when he's being makdish money, he doesn't want to include anything that's not clear cut. Surely, when he's talking about placing an isser upon himself, he will not want to include anything that's not clear cut. And the Ran says, Kosher and Gufilim Eilos Veka, Hilchach, therefore, must listen the Stam Naziris Lahakel, Rabbi Eliezer. The Mishnah that says Stam Naziris Lahakel would follow the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer. Amar le Abaye. So Abaye says, V'mayu Kimta, L'sopik Naziris Lahakel, Rabbi Eliezer. You want to say that the Mishnah of Sopik Naziris Lahakel is following the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer. Well, let's look further down in that same Mishnah. Ema Sefer. The Mishnah says, Sofik B'chayris. If there was a Sofik B'chayr, so Sofik B'chayris could be in three different cases. There's a B'char Adam. There's a Sofik if this child is a B'char, and whether or not this child requires a pidyon abed. There's B'char Behema. There's a Sofik if this animal is the firstborn animal and it becomes a korban. And then there's Petach Hamar. There's a Sofik if this is the firstborn Hamar, and we know the halach is that Kol B'char Hamar Tifta B'seh. You have to be pointed B'seh. Actually, as an aside, when someone makes a pidyon aben, he makes a bracha al pidyon aben. When someone makes pidyon Petach Hamar, he makes a bracha and pidyon Petach Hamar. But when someone gives the B'char to Hektish, a B'char Behemah, there is no bracha at all. So there's actually a discussion as to why there is no bracha when you give over a B'char. So there are those who say, I believe the Taz explains, that when you're being paid a B'char, you're actually doing a transaction. You're giving the Kohen money to be paid to the B'char. Or when you're making pidyon Petach Hamar as well, you're taking the Kedusha off the Hamar and you're putting it on the set. But when you're giving the B'char to the Kohen, you're not doing any action because the B'char was already Kaddish Merechem. So you're not doing any transaction, and that's why you don't make a bracha on that transaction. That's what I think the Taz explains. Anyway, Sofik B'char. So if any three of these cases of B'char turn out being a Sofik, Echad B'char Adam, the Echad B'char Behema, Bein Tmeya Sai, if it's a Behema Tmeya such as a Petach Hamar, Bein Torah, if it's just a regular kosher animal, the halacha is Hamotzi Mechaver Olav. You don't have to give it to the kohen because it's mum. And when it comes to mumminess, we say Hamotzi Mechaver Olav. You have to prove that I owe you the money, and only then do I have to give it to you, the kohen. However, V'tani Allah, but the Brisa says on that, or the Mishnah says on that, V'asurim begizav avoda. So even though they're only a suffix, whether they're a B'char, they still have the Isurim of a B'char, and therefore they're also Begizav Avodah. So it's very schwer, because you see here that even a suffix Isser is concluded in an Isser. And let's see what the Ran says. Echad B'char Adam, Echad B'char Behema. What is the suffix? Going to Yolda Zachar Unakeva. A Zachar and a Keva were born together. We don't know who was born first. V'tani Allah Asurin Begizu B'Avoda. Seifa the Masnisin Gufa the Sofik Naziris Lahaka. This is the Seifa of the very Mishnah of Sofik Naziris Lahaka. V'Hachi Parach, and this is what the Gemara here is asking. Bishlama Ilaimuk, because the Duran is asking. So this is a stira between the Reisha and the Seifa of the Mishnah. The Reisha says Sofik Naziris Lahaka. And then here it says Sofik Behema, Sofik B'char is going to be also Begizav Avodah. What does this have anything to do with a B'zeira? This is a regular stira, Minei Ubei in a Mishnah into Hiris. So ask the Kash over there, why is that relevant to our Sugya? Zokteran, the Bishlama Ilayma Kminin La Karabalazer. Bishlama, if we didn't say that this Mishnah in Nazir, the Mishnah in Hiris, where it says Sofik Naziris L'Hakol. If we didn't blame this on Rabbi Eliezer, then Loi Kosher Reisha Sefer. Then I would be able to say that it's not a steer from the Reisha to the Sefer. The Reisha, the Sofik Naziris L'Hakol, in the Reisha, that Mishnah where it says Sofik Naziris L'Hakol, is Mishum the Gufay Loi Ma'ayel Inishla Sveika. His own goof, that he's not going to put himself into a Sofik Yisr. But the Sefer, where it speaks about his money, it's the B'char that's giving to the Kohen. The Sefer, the Sofik B'char, is keeping the Mamano who Amrino, we say, the Ma'ayel Inish Mamano L'Sveika. El Lidach, according to you, Reb Zera, who says that there is no distinction. You can bring a raya. You can say there's a parallel between Sofik Mammon and Sofik Isra Aguf. El Lidach, the Lo Shani Lach Ben Gufil Mamoinoi. Kosher, how are you going to explain this distinction? You can't say that there's a difference between Gufay and Mamoinai. And for the Gemara, I don't understand your kasha to begin with. Frank the Gemara, Amar Lei, Amai Kamadam is Kedusha Ba Meileh, Lekdusha Ba the Adam. This makes no sense at all. We're talking about when someone brings an issue upon himself and makes a statement, will he wade into gray area, into area of suffix? By suffix b'chor, you didn't say anything. It became kedusha by itself. It's a regular question of suffix iser, if it's the chum or the kula. It has nothing to do with our question when you're analyzing someone's speech. What does he mean? Does he mean to include suffix? Because that has nothing to do with speech. So zogt the heilige Ran, Amayka Madam's kedusha above Meileh, the kedusha above the Adam, Mishum the kedusha above the Adam, who the ikal meimar, the high gavra loy gamar loy yulid nafshe, umamanei l'sveika. When he's talking about a neder that he made, kedusha that he's bringing upon himself, or Israel that he's bringing upon himself or his mammon, there we'll have the argument that someone doesn't want to wade into the area of suffix. Aval the kedusha above the shemayim. The chor comes by itself. It's a kedusha that comes by itself. Lekel meimer hachi. The ati. Is it in his hands that his intention should have any relevance? So what's the kasha? So the question is, what was the havamina? What was the havamina? When we learned it, it didn't even make sense. What was the havamina to even suggest that there should be a raya from Safek B'chor? So some of the achronim are masber. If you remember, a couple of lot ago, we actually had a machloikas tanoim if B'chor is called Dover HaNoder or Dover HaOser, because the Gemara said that you do have to proclaim that this is a B'chor. Sure, it is Kodesh Merechem, but there's also a halacha that you have to proclaim it as a B'chor. And there was a shayla, therefore, that proclamation, would that make it that the B'chor should be a Dover HaNoder, or just because you have to make the proclamation, since it's Kodesh anyway by itself, it's not a Dover HaNoder. So maybe that was the Gemara's Havamina over here. Since you do have to proclaim this as a B'chor, maybe that's why the Gemara thought to equate it with our Shaila as to what his intent is. Will he wade into an area of Safek or not? But of course, the Gemara Lamaskana says there's no raya from there. If you want to ask a kasha, I'll tell you a good kasha that you could ask. Oh, thank you very much. I'll tell you a good kasha you can ask. Up to more.
Why didn't you accept what I offered?
Because I didn't want to. I didn't want a coffee, but I can't insult him. Okay.
Why you didn't ask me?
That's right. El ikasha hakasha. Safek mashkin litame tame. What if you have mashkin and it's a suffix if it became tame? What occurred? So the Iran tells us what occurred was safek mashkin. To go in shahoshit tame yodoi levena mashkin. Someone who was tame, he stuck his hand out near the mashkin, but he didn't see, and we're not sure if he actually touched the mashkin. Then you do it nagabahem. So if it's safek mashkin litame, if we're discussing whether or not the mashkin itself is tame, we will go to chumrah and we will say it's tame. But what if this mashkin then goes and touches something else? L'tamei acherim. But if it's a question of if something touches it, that secondary object tame, tahar, there we say it's tahar, divrei Rab Meir. V'chein haya Rabbi Elazar omer kedvar, and Rabbi Elazar agreed with that. Let's see the run. L'tamei tame, kloimer. L'tumas atzman, when we're making a judgment as to whether the mashkin itself is tame, as lina and l'chumra, we go l'chum. Avoloi l'tamei acherim. Okay, we'll stop here. We're not going to learn the last Nedarim. The next Nedarim actually says Ikad Nuchsi the Gashi Hacha Divrei Rab Meir and Hayar Ablazar Mekadvarov, which is actually the Girsa of our Gemara, and the Ran just says that this is referring to a Tosefta because the Mishnah itself doesn't say V'chein Hayar Ablazar Mekadvarov, so it must be referring to a Tosefta, but it's really the same kasha. So Rabbi Elazar said that Safek Mashkin litame is tame, but the tamechem is tar, and v'chein hoya Rabbi Elazar im kedvarav. And on that the Gemara asks a stira, umi svirle l'Rabbi Elazar litame tame. Was Rabbi Elazar hold that if it's a Safek tame, if this Mashkin, if it's a Safek, whether or not became tame or not, you go l'chumra and you say that it's tame. Well, Tanya, we have another brayso that says, Rabbi Elazar Omer ein tumul mashkin kolikir midai raisa. There is no tumas mashkin. The whole fact that a mashkin can become tame is only midirabana, and therefore, if it's a safek, if the mashkin became tame, that's a safek derabana, and safek derabana and lakula. So why does Rabbi Lazar say that Safek Mashkin li Tamei is Tamei if it's a Safek? If the Thomas Mashkin is only Midrabanan, it shouldn't be Tamei mi Safek, because Safek Drabanan Lakula. And Teda, Rabbi Lazar says, I know for a fact that Thomas Mashkin is only Midrabanan.
It's like, did he feel that he touched something for sure?
It's a Safek. It's a Safek. I
I
don't know exactly what the mitzvah of the Safek was. He put his hand somewhere, and we don't know if he touched it or not. So you're asking, how could you not know? Did you feel it or not? Kasha from I don't know the answer to that. But it's a Safek. So the Rebbe Lazar says, I'm going to prove to you that Tumas Mashkin is not Midaraisa. Sharei Heid Rabbi Yosy ben Yezer is Streda. And this is not relevant to our discussion of Tumah. Heid Rabbi Yosy ben Yezer is Streda al Ayel Kamsa on a certain type of insect, Dochen, that it's kosher. We had it? That it's kosher. Well, we have the star here that tells us that, where did we see this Gemara before? In Avodah Zarah Lam Zayin Amud Aleph. Okay. So we had the word Dochen before.
I'll come to Shiva.
Okay. So hey, Rabbi Yosy when you straight al Ayel comes to Dochen, that it's a kosher animal. And now is the relevant part. The al mashkin.
It's a grass animal.
It's an insect, yeah. The al mashkin based mitbachaya, and the mashkin that was in the butchering area in the Beis Hamikdash, Dochen that it's tahor. So the question is, if midoraisa there's the tumas mashkin, how could we be over a deraisa and say that there's no tumah? Elamai, it must be that the whole tumah of mashkin is only midirabanan, and therefore they weren't geyser in the butchering area of the Beis Hamikdash, because then it would be barba tumah. It would cause a lot of tumah there. So the Rabbanan did not make that gzeira of tumas mashkin. So you see clearly that tumas mashkin is midirabanan, and if that's the case, why did Rabbi Lazar say that Safek li tamei is tamei? If you have a Safek whether or not the mashkin became tamei, we say it's tamei. It's only a Safek derabanan. Okay, so Zokt the Heilige Ram, Ein Tumah L'Mashkin Kol Ikar Midai Raisa, Alala Kamsa, Chagov, it's a grasshopper, Shishmoy Ayel. Dochen Tar Kosher L'Achila. Ve'al Mashke Beis Mitbachaya Dochen, we had it in the Gemara, we had it in the Ram. Maybe in the Ram we had it, because the Gemara is trying to be right from that Dochen can mean kosher. Yeah. Ve'al Mashke Beis Mitbachaya Dochen, the Chivan, the Tumas Mashkin Midar Abanon, the whole mikar of any type of tumas mashkin is only midirabanan. The mashka bei mitbachaya loy gozer. There they said we're not going to have tumas mashkin. Shaloy laharba is tumah bazar. We want to keep tumah down to a minimum in dazar. We don't want to create more opportunity for tumah. The chivan the tumas mashkin midirabanan heichi machmerin b'sfakayu. Since it's only midirabanan, how could you be machmer on its suffix? So we have a problem with Rabbi Lazar. Zok to Gemara bishlama. According to Shmuel, I would understand why there's a chumr here. The Amar Dochen milatama yacher. That we say that mashkin based with the chay is Dochen, that just means that it won't be matama anything else, because that mashkin is tahar midrabanan. It's not tahar from becoming tama itself. That's a deraisa. The derabanan is that a mashkin can be matama something else. So that gzeira that midrabanan a mashkin can be mitama something else will be suspended in the Beis Hamikdash. Aval tumas atman, but they themselves contracting a tumah and therefore them becoming possible to be used. Yesh bain, there surely would be tumah. So then it's shapir, and that would explain why if it's Safek became tamei, you go l'chumrah because that's already a Safek tumah d'oraisa. But if it's a Safek the Rabbanon, meaning if we're discussing it being matama something else, there you go, the kula. El Rab the Amar Dochen Mamish. According to Rab, will hold that the whole Tumas Mashkin is midrabanan. Ma'ikala Meimar. Why is it that Rabbi Lazar holds that Safek Litame, if it's a Safek, if the Mashkin be him Tame, you say it's Tame l'Chumra. It's only midrabanan. So that's a good kasha to ask a steer in Rabbi Lazar. Now it's very interesting to note that we know we have a rule, Safek d'oraisa l'chum. But the question is that rule midaraisa or midarabanan? Midairaisa is subject to Raisa L'chumer, or really subject to Raisa you can be Mekel. But there's a Gzera D'Rabbanan that if you have a subject to Raisa, you have to go L'chumer. So the Rambam holds that the whole rule of subject to Raisa L'chumer is only a Gzera B'Drabbanan. So if that's the case, then even if you hold that it's a Diraisa, Tumas Mashkin, there would still be a makam to say that suffix should be tar, because since it's only tar misafik midarbanan, right? Since you only say l'chum midarbanan, maybe the rabbanan won't say suffix. So that's an aside. But I'll call upon there is such a machlokes.
And Suchem is also Ashale, if it's mat b'chayu or mat b'chayu, only on the Mizbaya things or on the whole b'chayu.
Okay. So it's Michael Mimer, Ella, Ha Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shimon. We're forced to say that this stira that we have in Rabbi Elazar, one's going according to Rabbi Yehuda and one's going according to Rabbi Shimon. So we have one brisa that says that Safek, if Mashkin is Safek Tameh, we go l'chumra, and then we have another brisa that says that Tumas Mashkin is only midarabana. So whether or not Tumas Mashkin is midarabana deraisa, we'd have to say it's totally Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya we learned. Oh, I think I am making a mistake. So let's see the round inside. Ha nichalu Shmuel Damar Dochen milatama acherim. Aval Tumas Atman Yesh Bahen Nicha. The Mishum the Tumas Atman midaraisa. Therefore, as leading us of the Keluchumar. Lamanda Mardachan Mamish Tafilu Tumas Atman the Derbanon Michael Meimar Havalon Lamezal Bisfukayu Lakula. We should have said that Suffolk Mashkin Tomei should be Tar. V'chitei Mafrekteran. Im Kain, if that's the case, Afilu Loimak Minin Ha the Suffolk Naziris Lahakal Krebelazar Heichinichi Ha Kati Kachi Rebelazar. Why is this stira that we asked in Rabbi Eliezer? What does it have to do with our sugya? It seems like if you have a kasha on our teretz that we said that our Mishnah is going according to the Chachamim who hold Tzavik Nedarim L'Chomer, and the Mishnah in Tahiris that says Tzavik Naziris L'Chomer is going according to Rabbi Elazar. And then based on that, we're asking the steer in Rabbi Elazar. The steer in Rabbi Elazar is there anyway. In what place Rabbi Elazar said that Tzavik Mashkin Tamei is Tamei, and he also said that it's Ramana. So regardless, there's a steer in Rabbi Elazar. Why does it have to do anything with what we said? Zok to Gemara, the Amar Behedya, the Tumas Mashkin Midrabanan, Kitakatani, ain't Tamal Mashkin Goliker. Va'afilu achi, also B'Sveikai, Lochomer, Kitakatani, V'chein Hoyer, Rabbi Eliezer, Mekadvaro. So because of that, break it around, why is this relevant to our sugya? This is a steer in Rabbi Elazar in what he holds about Tumas Mashkin. So Zok V'chein Hoyer, Rabbi Eliezer, Mekadvaro. Allah, that he does have a Mashkin Li Tamei, right? The Mishnah says that Sabik Mashkin Li Tamei is Tamei, and on that, the Mishnah said, "V'chein Hoyer Rabbi Eliezer Mekadvaro." So Rabbi Eliezer also holds that Sabik Tumas Mashkin is Tamei, so you see to the right. Yesh Loimar, Emfert the Ram, the Hachi Parach. This is the Gemara's Kasha. Bishlama.
You see that wasn't an ask. That Suffolk Mashkin is an ask.
You see that.
Because he said
You see that the Tumas Mashkin is the Raisa because if you have a Suffolk, we go L'Chumra. So Zog to Gemara, Yesh Loimar the Hachi Parach. Bishlama ihach the Suffolk Naziris L'Hakel Loi Misukma Rabbi Eliezer. Bishlama if the Bryce of Naziris has nothing to do with Rabbi Eliezer. Loi Kasha. Then just the two comments that Rabbi Eliezer made about Tumas Mashkin would not be contradictory. The Ikala Meimar, Rabbi Eliezer Machmer B'Suffolk Afilu B'Derabbanan. You could say Rabbi Eliezer Taka holds it's only B'Derabbanan, but he could still be Machmer B'Suffolk. He holds the Tumas Zazach that the Rabbanan were Machmer on even B'Suffolk, even though the whole Tumas is only B'Suffolk. That would be a legitimate argument. But now that we're saying Avol Kivul the Amrit, the Suffolk Naziris L'Hakel is Rabbi Eliezer he. Now that you want to say that Suffolk Naziris L'Hakel is going according to Rabbi Eliezer, so this is a little bit of a stretch. So listen to this. He, the Hava Kedusha, Haba B'Dei Adam, even though Naziris is not a Kedusha that comes from the Torah, it's a Kedusha that you bring upon yourself. Heichi Adifa Tumah D'Rabbanan Aval Pi Shiba Me'ela Min Naziris D'Oraisa. How could you say that there'll be more Machmer by Tumah D'Rabbanan than they would be by Naziris D'Oraisa? By Naziris D'Oraisa, when there's a Suffolk Lashon, we say L'Kula. But when there's a suffix of a tumas mashkim midrabanan, there we say l'chumra. That doesn't make sense. Aval bishi baba de adam. V'chi. So zokt around. That's why it's fair. Without us making a statement that Rebbe Lezer holds that suffix is just l'kula, I would suggest that maybe he holds the makom to be machmer, even though tumas mashkim midrabanan, he still holds to be machmer. But if you see he holds that a tumah that you bring upon yourself, a kedusha that you bring upon yourself, we say l'kula, it's not mistaber to say that by a drabanan you should say l'chumra. V'chi tema, and if you want to say, what do you mean? Hakazinim behedya, the bekedusha abba b'dei adam, aval pi shehimi deraisa mekol Rebbe Elazar b'sveikei. Forget what we said. Forget what we said that the Mishnah that talks about Sabbath Moshe L'Hakal is going to Rebbe Elazar. Take that out of the equation. You still have another brisa where Rebbe Elazar said that a suffix Tumah Baba Yodai, you go l'kula. The Katani law, we learned right there on Amud Beis, Loi Hikdish es a kvi. So Rabbi Elazar holds Loi Hikdish es a kvi. So there you see that by a deraisa, if it's a suffix, you don't machmer. You say he didn't include that. So ask from there directly on Rabbi Elazar, how could you say that the suffix Tumah derabanan would be l'chumra? The chibin shekain, the chibin shekain, afilu kiloy mekmin hakla suffix naziris lokal Rebbe Elazar. Still, it would be kosher to Rebbe Elazar. On that talked around, no, it's only shver because of naziris. Why? Because ikal neimer dav matzinu l'tchuye, we could have had a whole different shot in why Rebbe Elazar is matter the kfi. You know why he's matter? Tiny time Rebbe Elazar doesn't do with suffix. It's the amar lo hikdish is a kfi. Mishum the kvi shmoy Allah. Maybe kvi is a very b'fnei atzma. V'loy kar le'ninchi chaya v'loy behima. Maybe he holds it's not a suffix. Kvi is not a suffix, and therefore when he said behema, he doesn't mean to include suffix. When he said chay, he doesn't mean to include suffix. Kvi is a shem b'fnei atzma, and nobody ever means kvi when they say behema. No one ever means kvi when they say chaya. So therefore, from there you don't have a raya. But the fact that we want to attribute the Mishnah is the Mishnah to Hires. That says something just lahakel. So by a deraisa, we're saying you go l'kula. Surely it's not logical to say that suffix tumah that's only a tumah midrabanan should go l'chumra. So therefore, the kasha here is how could you say that the Mishnah in Tahayis is going to come to Rebbe Elazar? So we're stuck now. We have a stira now between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Tahayis. Our Mishnah says Stam Nedarim L'Hakmer, and the Mishnah entire says Stam Naziris L'Hakel, and we can't attribute this anymore to Rebbe Elazar because otherwise it's going to lead to a stira in Rebbe Elazar. Therefore, the Gemara says, let's say the machlokes between our Mishnah and the Mishnah entire is a completely different machlokes, nothing to do with Rebbe Elazar, rather Ha Rabbi Yehuda v'Ha Rabbi Shimon. Very nice teretz, but the Gemara doesn't say it. Okay, very good. So Zok the Gemara, Harab Yehuda, Harab Shimon, Titania. Hareini Nazir. What if someone says, I'm a Nazir? Im yesh b'kri hazeh me'akor. There's a big pile of wheat, and I said, if do you remember when we were younger in the department stores, they used to have a big jar of jelly beans, and they would say, if you could guess how many jelly beans there are, then you win a prize. So that's mamish where it came from. It came from this Mishnah. Someone said, already knows there, if in this pile there's me'akor. And then when he went to see if in fact there was me'akor there, and then you went and you found that it was stolen or that was lost. So you have no way of verifying whether or not the Kabbalas Naziris was there. So we have a suffix Kabbalas Naziris. Rabbi Yehuda Matir, Rabbi Yehuda Smuter, and we want to say he'll hold Stam Naziris L'Hakel because you don't get involved in the suffix. Rabbi Shimon Eiser. And Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda. There was actually a contradiction that the Gemara asked in Rabbi Yehuda himself. Me, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Aloyma Ayel in Nafshil Sveika. Does Rabbi Yehuda take a hold that a person won't enter into a suffix? And therefore, when he accepted upon himself Naziris, if there's a me'akor in this creed, he for sure wouldn't have in mind such a Naziris or a mini. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Stam Truma Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, before we do this kasha, let's just point out one thing, which the Ram points out. What's the difference if the Kri was stolen or not? it's a suffix when he was makabel upon himself Naziris. It's a suffix if there was 100 kor or not. So let's see what the Ran says about this. Zog the Heilige Ran. V'halach u'motzai shenignav oisha avad Rabbi Yehuda Matir. Zog the Heilige Ran. Mishum d'loi masik adaite the lahavanozir ad sheyisbar loi sheyev oisha kri meyagur. He's not accepting the Naziris only when he's sure that there'll be a mea kor there. So I guess once you find out that there's mea kor, will there be a Naziris or not? Okay, so the Gemara says Akashin Rabbi Yehuda. Here Rabbi Yehuda said loy ma'ayil in ishnaf shel. Since there's a suffix here, we don't know if there's 100 kor or not. A person definitely didn't have kavana to be mekabel Naziris misafik. But a Ramini, I'm going to show you a place where when there's a suffix, Rabbi Yehuda holds Stam Nedarim L'Hakmer from our very Mishnah. Because Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Stam Truma B'Yehuda is a surah, uveglil muteris. Why is it muter in glil? She'ein anshe glil makirin es truma salishka. In glil, when they say truma, they mean truma of the kohen, not truma salishka. Taima dein makirin. The only reason why we say the anshe glil, when they say truma, they mean truma's kohen and not truma salishka, because that's the only truma that they discuss. And like the Ran told us in the Mishnah, if they refer to truma salishka, they would have said specifically truma salishka. If it was a suffix. If it was a suffix makirin, if they recognize truma salishka, and therefore when they say truma, it could go both ways, and it's ambiguous. Asurin, in fact, it will be asur. So you see clearly, Rabbi Yehuda holds that when a person will make a naziris, even misafik. So if that's the case, here Rabbi Yehuda says a person would make naziris misafik in our Mishnah. Yet in the case of the Kri, we say that Rabbi Yehuda says mutter. He wouldn't be makabel naziris. So we have a steer in Rabbi Yehuda Gufay. Amarava, I'm sorry, unclear. I'll be more clear about what ambiguous means. Amarava, Gabe Kri, by the Shiloh Kri. You know why Rabbi Yehuda holds it's not a good Naziris? Kasavar, Kol Shesveika, Chomer Mivadai, Loy Ma'al Nafshel Sveika. Really, Rabbi Yehuda holds if it's a Sobek Nedarim L'Hakmer. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda said in our Mishnah that if Truma can go both ways, we're Machmer. So why don't we say the same thing? You're machmer by the case of the Kri, even though it's a suffix, I also want to be makabel naziris, because over there the suffix is more chomer than the vadai. When do I say by a suffix I want to be makabel naziris? That's if I'm makabel a regular naziris. But if my kabbalah, because it's a suffix, it's going to be more chomer, that I don't want. Why is suffix naziris more chomer than vadai naziris? The yilu gabe nazir vadai megaleach umevi karbon v'nechal. If someone's a Nazir, he can get out of it. After the 30 days, he could go through the process and he could get rid of his Naziris. But Val Sveik, if you're a Suffolk Nazir, you can never bring the carbon because you're not allowed to bring Suffolk Chulun Lazara, and therefore, Leimotzi Megaleach, he'll never be able to get out of his Naziris. So, yeah, Suffolk Naziris, someone's not going to want because that's going to mess him up. So, that's why in the case of the Kri, we say he didn't have in mind to review all this mutter. But in the case where it's going to be a Vada Naziris, there's no problem.
Then you have to then say, I'm on it now, I'm making Naziris. If that was a Naziris, then I'm not. And if it's not, then I am. So then he could pop it himself.
That's too complicated for me.
As a machmach,
Okay, I want to stick to the Gemara. I don't want to overcomplicate the Gemara. So let's do what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says. So the problem with this is the problem with this step is that you don't have to bring all three karbonos. They ask that the chatos you can't bring misafek, but the shlomim and the oila you could bring alatnai, right? If I'm a nazir, it should be a carbon to patam and nazirs. But no. But once again, since lechatchila you have to bring all three, a person's not going to make such a nazirs where he can't discharge it properly. Amalei Rafuna by Hudal Rabba. I'm sorry.
That's why nazirs would live.
Yeah. But Amalei Rafuna by Hudal Rabba. What was the case in the Brisa? Someone said, "Already nazir if there's meya kur in this creed," but it doesn't specify what type of nazirs. Meaning, it includes all types of nazirs. So, what about Amar Haredi Nazir Olam? What if there's Haredi Nazir Olam? There anyway, it'll never end. So, if there anyway, it'll never end. Why over there did Rabbi Yehuda say it's not a good nazirs? Amalei Nazir Olam Nami Sveke Chamar Mivadai. Even a Nazir Olam, a suffix is worse than a Vadai. Dila Vadai, if he's a Nazir Vadai, then Hich B'Tzairoi, if his hair got too long, Mekel B'Sar, you could actually trim the hair a little bit. Maybe Shalosh Behemoths. Vilusvekaloi. Vilusvekaloi. So Dr. Gemara, what about Omar Hareini Nazir Shimshon? The Nazir Shimshon, you can never cut hair at all. My what halacha? Amalei Nazir Shimshon Loi Tanya. That already he didn't mean. In the Brisa where it says Nazir, yes, you can say it includes even that Nazir, but maybe Nazir Shimshon it does not include. So there's a beautiful shtickle on this. What's up is Nazir Shimshon Loi Tanya? What's up is Nazir Shimshon Loi Tanya? So we had a shtickle right at the beginning. We had a shaila as follows. How could you? We had a shaila zoy. How could someone be mekabel naziris on a t'nai? Toisvis asks in Maseches Nazir, how could you be mekabel naziris on a t'nai? We learned that anything that you cannot do al yidei shlichos, you can't make a t'nai on. Naziris you can't do al yidei shlichos. So what did Toisvis answer? Toisvis answered that the karbonis you could do al yidei shlichos. So that's very good. Al nazirsim. But a Nazir of Shimshon, where there are no karbonis, how could you do it on the shlichus? So could be that pshat why the Brisa wouldn't have included Nazir Shimshon, because maybe you can't make it now on Nazir Shimshon. Amalei, but the Gemara says it's not a good teretz, because the Amar of Adabar Abba, Tani Nazir Shimshon. Rabbi Adabar Abba said that there's a Mefurish of Brisa that says that this same halacha applies, that the Yehuda says mutter even by Nazir Shimshon. And over there, the suffix is no worse than the Vadai. I don't know what to tell you. Rav Ashi Amar, Hahi Rabbi Yehuda Mishim Tarfin. That Rabbi Yehuda who holds that by the case of suffix, if there's an decree may occur or not, that actually is a different Rabbi Yehuda. There's actually a machlokes what Rabbi Yehuda holds, and that brisa was Rabbi Yehuda following the shita of Rabbi Tarfin. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Tarfin. What if there's two friends sitting here side by side, and they see someone coming from a distance, and one friend says, "If that's Yankel, I'm a Kabul Naziris." The other fellow said, "If that's not Yankel, I'm a Kabul Naziris." So one of them would have to be a Nazir. Zokr Tarfin ain't echad mehem Nazir. Neither of them would be a Nazir. You know why? Lefisha lo nitna Naziris elo lahaflom. Naziris only kal if someone is clear at the time that he made the Naziris, if it's going to be chal, and therefore, in our case as well, since someone said I'm making Naziris, if the kriyas may occur and I don't know it, then regardless it wouldn't be chal, because at the time of his kabbalah it's not clear whether or not there's 100 kor.
So then he takes away half of himself.
Ein echad men Nazir, b'mesechas Nazir t'nan law. Two people were walking. They saw someone coming from the distance, approaching them. One said, "I'll be a Nazir if this is Yankel coming." I'm beginning to become a Nazir if it's not Yankel. Neither of them is a Nazir. Rabbi Yehuda explained the reason for Abtarfin. Unless it's spoken out with clarity. You have to express without any tanai, because it has to be clear at the time of your expression whether or not this is a good naziris. The mashma sheyifarish, it has to be clear. You can't be makabel naziris on a condition that's going to be verified later. Brisa the Oima already knows Shimshon. Im yesh b'kriya zeh meyakur, the law have a nazar kavasei that could be going according to Rav Tarfin. As long as if you don't know at the time that you're saying it that it's Naziris, then Rav Tarfin knows it won't be Naziris. Do we pass like Tarfin? I don't know. Zaktamar ihachi my area shenigna v'oishavad. So why do we need a case with Nigna Avad? Even if it wasn't Nigna or Avad, since at the time that I was Makabal Naziris, I didn't count the Kriya. I don't know if there's 100. Ella, you know why I said Nigna Avad? Ella, the Acha Koichad Reb Shimon. The Avogab, the Nigna Avad, and you could never verify it. Still, Reb Shimon holds that it's going to be a good Kabbalah Naziris, because of ma'ayil inish nafshel esreika. Breaking the Rishonim, I don't understand. When you have a choice of amplifying a Chiddush and Heter or amplifying a Chiddush and Isser, we always say that the Chiddush of Heter is more important. So why over here are we picking a case that's going to show this Tzarach Chomer? Let's say that even if the Kri is Be'en, still Rabbi Yehuda holds that it wouldn't be a good Naziris. Lo diacha koichet Rabbi Yehuda, the koichet the Torah other. Zotiran lesson. Here it doesn't make sense to say that. Why? The kiva on the time of Mishum Deloy Nitin Naziris El Laflo. Since the svara here is that Naziris is not the good Naziris unless it's spoken out clearly. Leka koichet the Torah Tzvei ki isa be'enai mishanikna v'shabat. Either way, you still see the same koich heter. Aval hashta the noket leben nignav, but nignav is only a chiddush ashmiin and erbusa to Reb Shimon the lechayish l'naziris tafla. Reb Shimon who doesn't hold that you need a flaw, it's still chayiv. The oidem ayal nafshel esveika, and a person will still put himself into a suffix. So here there is no koich heter anyway, because there's no difference from Reb Yehuda's perspective. It was nignav or not. Therefore, we want to say the koich is. Let's see the Gemara right here. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Stam Truma Rabbi Yehuda.
Anyway, it's not going to be.
Sorry?
Anyway,
right, correct. Even if you can verify 100% that there was Mea Kor, it still wouldn't be Naziris. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Stam Truma Rabbi Yehuda. So let's just review what the Mishnah said so that we'll be able to understand the Gemara much more easily. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Stam Truma Rabbi Yehuda is a surah. Why? The Ram told us in the Mishnah because it can go both ways. And since it can go both ways, and we all stam nedarim lahachmer, that's why it's a surah. But the Galil, where people, when they say truma, they never have in mind trumas alishka. They only have in mind trumas of iser. There it's mutter she'ein anshe Galil makirin as trumas alishka. So now let's see the Gemara. Zog Taylor Gemara in the Galil, stam truma is not going to be a neder because it's referring to regular trumas koyin. But hamakirin, but if in a place where they do recognize truma as also meaning trumas alishka, then asurin, then following stam nedarim lechumra, it would be also. Amal, what do you see? Sveika lechumra. You see that the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, the shita of the Mishnah is stam nedarim lechumra, which is continuing on in the same shita that the Mishnah starts with. But Amos Seifa, let's look at the very next line in the Mishnah. Stam charam and Yehuda's mutarin. Why are Stam Charam and Behuda Mutarin? It's a suffix if there it means Chem of Gavaya or Chem of Kahanim. Uva Galil Asurin in Galil, there's no suffix for sure it's Asur. Why? She'ein Anshe Galil Makirin es Cherma HaKahanim. Because they're not Makir Cherma Kahanim at all. So let's make the same deal. Kamakirin. If in Galil they would recognize Cherma Kahanim as well as Cherma Gavaya, we would say it's mutter. Meaning, we would say if you could interpret their words lakula or lachumra, you're going to interpret it lakula. Almost fake lakula. You see from the sefer of the Mishnah, from the case of cherem, that when it's a suffix, which one it is, you go lakula. So let's go weiter. Stam cherem Yehuda is mutarin. Why is it mutarin? Because it's a suffix. In Yehuda, it can mean cherem koyin, it can mean cherem gavoya, and you go lakula. Over galil asurin, because it could only mean cherem so it could only mean chermei gavaya. So you see clearly that you say stam nedarim lakula, and you're only machmir if there's no suffix. But hamakirin, if it can go both ways, mutarin al masveka lakula. So we have a stira from the first half of the Mishnah to the case of cheramim. Amar Abaye, you're right. In fact, at this point in the Mishnah, we changed teams. And Sefer Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadiki, just like the Ran explained in the Mishnah, the Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Stam Truma Yehuda is a surah, because all it would mean is Chermei Gavaya. Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadiki Omer Stam Charam Begalil is a surin. Why is it Asur? Because only in Galil do we say it for sure means Chermei Gavaya, and therefore it's Asur. But Rabbi Yehuda holds that even Stam Truma Yehuda is Asura because a suffix as well, we go L'chomer. So Rabbi Yehuda holds a Safik, you go L'chumra, and Rabbi Elazar holds a Safik, you go L'kula, and therefore in Yehuda where it's a Safik, you would go L'kula, but in Galil where it's not a Safik, you'd go L'chumra. Okay, we'll stop here. Shkoyach.
So because they don't know Chemai